joining us now to talk a little bit about college baseball and college athletics as we speak and what's on the horizon. A good and great friend, the four-time National Coach of the Year, American Baseball Coaches Association Hall of Fame inductee. He's won nearly 1,500 games in his career, two-time SEC Coach of the Year, National Championship Team, and a coach of the U.S. College National Team as well. And he is Paul Mainieri. Paul, it's great to visit with you. I sincerely hope that you and your family are well in these strange times.
Well, thank you, Ken, and we all are doing well, and I hope your family is as well. It's good to hear your voice again. We haven't talked in a while.
It has been, but you're never far away from my thoughts. And, of course, I've been a huge Paul Mainieri fan since I first saw him on the diamond out on the lakefront way back when. So, and that remains the case. And I talked to our mutual buddy this past week, in fact, and he's doing well. So, listen, Paul, always a pleasure. And, of course, this has not been a pleasurable year, period, for anybody in 2020. And one of the things, just to talk about LSU baseball first, what I really liked about your team and the reason I thought your team had a chance to really go a long way this year is because you had pitching. You had pitching depth. You had a bullpen. You had guys that could throw hard. You had left-handers this year. And regardless of hitting, which people made a big deal out of early, I thought this team had a real chance because ultimately pitching and defense win, in particular in the postseason.
Ken, I agree with you, and I thought our team was ascending. I announced, at media days, our first day of practice, 3 weeks before opening day, that I thought our pitching would be elite, and I think it was elite. It might have been the best pitching staff we've had in my 14 years here at LSU. I also said that there were a lot of question marks about our lineup, and we'd have to try some different guys, and it may end up resulting in us losing a game or two that we probably should have won. And I think that ended up playing out as well. But I thought we had gotten to the point where I felt confident about our lineup, and I felt that we were getting better. We had won 5 in a row and 9 of our last 11, and we were ready for the FCC schedule and the challenge, that was ahead of us. So everybody was excited about it, of course, and we were on the bus getting ready to start the FCC portion of our schedule by traveling to Oxford, Mississippi, and we basically were told to get off the bus and not go because things were changing. So, we had to deal with that, and it was disappointing that we weren't able to play it through to the end, but obviously there were bigger issues in the world than college baseball, and we all recognize that.
The fallout since then has been pretty interesting. First and foremost, the opportunity for players to come back and play next year that otherwise would not have had the ability to do so. That's the first part. The second part is the Major League Draft being shortened dramatically, which is certainly going to have an impact as well. First, on the former point, on the ability of players to return, are you happy about that, and how does it impact your program?
Well, I assume you're talking about the seniors, and we only
Correct.
had 2 seniors,
Right.
Matthew Beck and Aaron George, and both of them were doing a really good job for us this year. I don't think Beck had given up a run, or maybe he had given up one, and I thought Aaron George had shown a great improvement from the year before when he came in as a junior college transfer. So I'm happy to have those 2 guys back. It's not going to affect us as much as it may other schools, because typically an SEC school recruits such good players that usually the best ones are signing after their junior year. And so we don't typically have large senior classes, and this year was no exception for that. So we're happy to have those 2 guys back, but I don't think it's going to impact us as much as the Major League Draft is. And as you mentioned, it's cut down to 5 rounds this year, so that could have a really big effect on our team, both with guys returning to school for technically it would have been their senior year, but officially now it'll be their junior year and repeat. But so we think we'll have some guys back that probably we would have lost in a normal draft, and I think we'll probably have some guys show up to school out of our recruiting classes maybe typically we would have lost as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out, and we'll find out pretty soon because the draft will be on June 10th and 11th, and And as soon as the draft is over, we'll see where we are.
Paul Mainieri with us from LSU, and it certainly appears to me that there will be a glut of talent, not only at LSU but at other SEC schools. The conference was absurdly good again this year based on the teams and the players that were already playing well. And it's going to be interesting to sort it out to get to your managing your roster number that you have to do. And we all know about the severe scholarship limits of less than 12 that are allowed. How do you sort through all this, and do you think you can get to the number comfortably?
Well, it's going to be a challenge, Ken. There's no question about that. It's kind of a catch-22 situation. We might have more really good players, but it also might mean that we have to have some really tough conversations with some players. We're still hopeful. The FCC has put in a proposal to the NCAA that I think went out today. We could expand the rosters and even get a couple of extra scholarships for this year alone. And if that happens, it'll be good for everybody. But you just never know what's going to happen. So we're kind of prepared for both scenarios, whether they give us some relief, the NCAA gives us some relief, or whether we have to deal with the regular numbers and just have to make some tough decisions. So time will tell. I'll be anxious to get it over with. It's been kind of a cause for anxiety for me over the last couple of months, just kind of wondering what's going to happen. For a while there, we didn't even think there was going to be a draft at all. And then in the negotiations between the Major League Players Association and the Major League Baseball Commissioner's Office, they came to an agreement that they would have a draft, but it would only be 5 or 10 rounds. And then subsequently they decided on 5 rounds. So at least we know what the situation is there. We just don't know the specifics of which players will get selected at this point.
I don't know if it's a moot point or if there's anything that can be done to continue to lobby to increase the number of scholarships. College baseball has become an extremely popular sport. Certainly in this neck of the woods, in SEC country, it's a revenue generator, fantastic facilities, outstanding attendance, and certainly the number 3 sport in terms of popularity or attendance, if not number 2 in a lot of different circles, and yet still less than 12 scholarships. It just doesn't add up. It never has. Is there anything that can be done?
Boy, Ken, I've spent 38 years as a head coach, and you've been around the game as long as I have or longer, and this is probably the most frustrating thing in my coaching career is just seeing the way that college baseball, has had to deal with the cutbacks, and particularly in scholarships. I was talking to somebody earlier today, and they didn't even realize until I told them that, in the 70s, schools were allowed to give 25 full scholarships, in the 60s, they were allowed 25 full scholarships for baseball. Then that number was cut down to 19 full scholarships. When I came to LSU in the fall of 1975, it was 19 full scholarships. Then it was trimmed down to 13, and then it was cut from there to 11.7. So it's been a frustrating thing for me in my time because, these youngsters that play college baseball, believe me, they put in the time and, the stresses on their academics and so forth. Everything is as tough as it is for football players and basketball players and other sports, but yet our players, have these partial scholarships and they have to pay the majority of their tab to college. And it's kind of sad really for me to think that these kids have to deal with it that way. These families have to deal with it that way, but that's the way it is, and we just have to do the best we can with it.
Then we watch universities subtracting programs around the country in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic. First of all, it's a terrible thing. It's had an incredible impact on so many lives, both in the physical sense and the financial sense, and I think it's going to get worse before it gets better, unfortunately, and yet we see the contraction of many college programs. It's 18 at last check and counting, and that includes college baseball programs. And I was going to ask you about that because it seems to me that every time there's a chance to cut, baseball seems to be at the forefront in many of these institutions, and it's puzzling, it's frustrating, and I'm sure you feel the same way about that.
Well, you hit the nail on the head, Ken, when you said that most college baseball programs are not self-sufficient. They're not revenue producers. And when you're not a revenue-producing sport, unfortunately, a lot of administrators look at your sport as a black hole where money goes in and never comes back out. And obviously football is the big cash cow, the straw that stirs the drink, and basketball is a distant second at most schools. There aren't many schools like LSU and a handful of others that create the revenue where they pay for themselves and maybe even put extra money in the coffers to help other sports. And when you're a revenue producing sport at that level, then you're treated a little bit differently. But unfortunately, across the country, there's 300 Division I playing schools. Actually, there were 301 going into this year, and not all the administrators think as highly of college baseball as they do here at LSU or other schools in this region. And so when they have to cut budget, like you said, unfortunately, the college baseball programs seem to be one of the first things that they think about doing is dropping the program. It's 35-man roster, 35 male students. So if you drop that sport, it helps their Title IX, what am I saying? Their rosters, the ratio of women athletes and men athletes. So, if they cut baseball, it saves them 35 spots in male rosters. And unfortunately, it's an expensive sport to run. Northern schools have to travel a lot, and so their expenses far outweigh, the revenues that they might bring in. And, it's kind of, in my mind, kind of short-sighted, because I think the value of a college baseball program should be evaluated much more deeply than just the amount of revenue that it produces. It can be a source of great inspiration for college communities, university communities, and the teams can be successful because even the haves like LSU are still limited to 11.7 scholarships, so they have a fighting chance to have a respectable program despite their location, despite a lot of the so-called disadvantages. And I think it's a little short-sighted when everybody starts talking about dropping baseball programs. It makes me sad because my whole life has been dedicated to college baseball. My father's whole life was dedicated to college baseball, and you just hate to see our national pastime be treated that way. So, but I also have empathy for the administrators that have to make those decisions because obviously money is tight, in normal circumstances, and this is not normal circumstances. So we've seen 3 programs get dropped: Chicago State, Bowling Green, and Furman. And I hope it's not just the tip of the iceberg as you described it, but I fear that it might be. One of the things that I think we have in favor of seeing programs stay is I think that college enrollments are going to be down as well because of this pandemic. And if you're not given a lot of scholarship money, but you still have 35 players on the team, that's a lot of revenue that can be provided for the university as a whole by just having the student population, schools, especially schools that are tuition driven, and I hope that most administrators will look at it that way. But, Ken, we could go off into a much deeper discussion just about, should we have a super duper, conference in Division I where everybody is very committed to baseball, and then let the other schools, have their own championship, the schools I'm talking about that don't want to make the commitment to baseball. But that's for another day.
Indeed. A couple of minutes left with Paul Mainieri of LSU. Back to the draft, and it's fluid. Anything could happen. With only 5 rounds, Lord knows it's going to be very intriguing to watch who's in and who's not. And, of course, they've allocated money to pay guys after the 5 rounds are up if they want to sign. With regard to your current team, most people project that there's 2 guys that certainly have a chance to go early on, and those certainly within the first 5 rounds, in Daniel Cabrera and Cole Henry. Is that the information you're getting? Is that what you have understood, or do you think there's more, less, or otherwise?
Well, I don't have any doubt that those 2 guys have the ability and are thought of, as top couple of round selections. I think the difference between the 2 of them is that Daniel Cabrera has been in school for 3 years, whereas Cole Henry's only been in school for 2 years. And so, I don't doubt that Daniel, given the opportunity that we expect him to get, would probably end up signing. I think Cole Henry's situation is a little more complex. You remember a few years back, Greg Dykman was a draft-eligible sophomore as well. He turned down about $600,000 signing bonus to come back for a third year, and he parlayed that into a $1.7 million signing bonus as a high second-round pick. So whether Cole Henry will, price himself out of the spot where we think he would be selected or not, that's up to Cole, and I don't know for sure what he's going to do, and I don't know for sure where he would get picked. I think if he went in the first round, certainly he would end up signing. But if he doesn't go by the end of the second round, it's probably because he's put a price tag on himself that clubs just don't want to meet, and then we'd have him back for his junior year. Whatever happens is going to happen, and we'll just deal with it at that time. But I do think there's several other guys that, given a normal year at the draft, we probably would have lost them, and the chances are that they may come back to school. And there's really probably a handful of guys, I don't really want to name them by names right now because they could end up being selected in the top 5 rounds, or they could end up signing for, the $20,000 bonus that passed over players would receive. So I don't really know for sure what's going to happen with those guys. I don't really want to talk about them specifically, but it's going to be interesting. And not only with the guys that have been on our team that are eligible for the draft, but also the incoming recruiting class. Just like we talked about Cabrera and Cole Henry, certainly there's guys in our recruiting class that are thought of very highly for the draft as well. So, and there'll probably be other guys that would have been drafted, perhaps at a spot where it would have been attractive enough for them to sign, that probably will end up coming to school because of that. So, on one hand, that's really great that we're going to have some really super players. On the other hand, if that happens, then it's going to lead to some very difficult discussions with some players as well. So, again, we're just going to have to wait and see what happens here. We're getting close to the draft time. It's a little over 2 weeks away, and pretty soon everything will be resolved, and we'll have a roster together for next year.
He's the head baseball coach of the LSU Tigers, one of the very best, and a good man. Paul Mainieri. Paul, listen, thank you very much for the visit. Blessings to you and yours in these unusual times, and we'll all be thrilled when we see people on a baseball diamond again. I surely hope it's sooner rather than later.
Well, I do too, and thank you so much for your well wishes, Ken, and same to you and all the people listening to your show tonight. It's good to be with you.
You got it, Paul. Thank you. Paul Mainieri of LSU.